One retiree's Social Security deposit lands about $1, 300 larger than a near-identical neighbor's, every single month, for the rest of their life. Same birth year, same employer, 3 decades at the same manufacturing firm, the same wage ladder, the same union contract. Their W-2s, laid side by side, are nearly indistinguishable. The Social Security Administration ran the same formula over both earnings records and arrived at the same number for what each was owed at full retirement age. And yet one check is roughly $1, 300 bigger. Start with the raw figures, because the gap is not abstract. In 2024, a worker who consistently earned at or above the taxable maximum and claimed at full retirement age, 67, for anyone born in 1960 or later, could expect a benefit in the neighborhood of $3.900 a month. The same worker who waited until 70 would see something closer to $5.100. That difference, call it $1.300, is the entire subject of this investigation. It is not a bonus, it is not interest, it is the mechanical output of a decision, and the decision has a date attached to it. Here is what makes the number worth dissecting. The instruction that produces it sounds almost insultingly simple. Wait. Don't claim at 62. Don't claim at 67. Hold until 70, and the government adds a fixed percentage to your check for every year you delay. The rule is public. The math is not hidden. The Social Security Administration will tell anyone who asks that delayed retirement credits accrue at 8% per year past full retirement age. There is no application to fill out, no lottery, no eligibility screen beyond having reached the age. The $1.300 is, in the most literal sense, sitting there. So here is the question this entire video exists to answer. If the larger check is just sitting there, public rule, published rate, no gatekeeper, why do most people who could reach it never actually get there? Why does the median claimant still file years early, leaving that money on the table with full knowledge that the table exists? Because the number is the easy part. Anyone can read the 8%. What almost no one reads is the price of admission, a price that isn't paid at 70 at all. This is not a story that moves forward. It moves backward. 2 neighbors ended at different places, and the honest way to understand why is to start at the finish line. The $1.300 gap, confirmed and on the books, and rewind the tape. Rewind past 70. Past the years of waiting. Past the retirement parties, the last paychecks, the quiet decisions each of them made in their early 60s that had nothing on the surface to do with Social Security at all. Because the 2 neighbors did not differ at 70, by 70 the outcome was already fixed. Both worked the same jobs, earned the same wages, qualified for the same full benefit. Everything that would separate their checks had already happened. They made one different choice. And it wasn't at age 70, 8% per year. That is the rate the Social Security Administration attaches to every month you delay a benefit past full retirement age. It is the engine that produces the $1.300, and it deserves to be taken apart bolt by bolt, because the headline hides more than it reveals. Start with the mechanism, not the outcome. Your benefit is anchored to a single figure the SSA calculates from your earnings record. The primary insurance amount. The amount you receive if you claim exactly at full retirement age. For anyone born in 1960 or later, that age is 67. The primary insurance amount is the base. Everything else is a multiplier bolted onto it. Claim before 67, and the machine runs in reverse. File at 62, the earliest possible age, and the benefit is cut by about 30% permanently. Not until 67. Not a temporary penalty that heals. A reduction that follows the check for the rest of the claimant's life, and later, in altered form, the surviving spouse's life too. Claim after 67, and the machine runs forward. This is where the delayed retirement credit lives. For every full year between full retirement age and 70, the SSA adds 8% of the primary insurance amount to the benefit. 3 years of waiting from 67 to 70 is 24%. A base benefit of $3.900 becomes roughly $4.836 from the credits alone, before annual cost of living adjustments, which are themselves calculated on the higher figure and compound the advantage. That is the whole mechanism. There is no investment, no market, no risk premium. The 8% is a statutory number written into federal law, unrelated to interest rates or fund performance. It stops accruing the month you turn 70. There is no reward for waiting past it. The credit is simple, mechanical, and this is the part worth sitting with, indifferent to who you are. Which forces a question the number alone cannot answer. Does the $1,300 belong to a real person or only to a spreadsheet? Look closely at what the 8% is multiplying. The credit is a percentage of the primary insurance amount. 8% of a large base is a large dollar figure. 8% of a modest base is a modest one. The rate is identical for every worker in America. The dollars are not, because the base is not. And the base is where the story quietly turns. The primary insurance amount is built from a worker's highest 35 years of earnings, indexed for wage growth, then run through a progressive formula that deliberately replaces a larger share of income for lower earners and a smaller share for high earners. To reach a primary insurance amount near $3,900, a worker has to have earned at or above the Social Security taxable maximum, $168,600 in 2024, for decades. Not occasionally, consistently, across a full career. Recalculate for the person who did not. The median earner reaching full retirement age in 2024 has a primary insurance amount closer to $1,900 than $3,900. Run the same 24% delay credit against that base, and the gap between claiming at 67 and claiming at 70 is not $1,300. It is closer to $450 a month. Same rule, same 8%, same 3 years of patience, roughly a third of the headline dollars. So the machine is honest and the machine is neutral, but the machine is also a multiplier, and a multiplier flatters whoever brings the biggest number to it. The $1,300 in the title is not a typical result. It is the result available to a worker at the very top of the taxable ceiling, the maxed earner whose lifetime W-2s pressed against the cap year after year. The 8% belongs to everyone, the base it multiplies belongs to almost no one. And the celebrated $1,300 only applies to a base that a small fraction of American workers ever actually reach. The maxed earner and the median earner start at the same door. Both are told the same thing. Wait until 70, collect 8% a year, walk away with a bigger check. Both would follow an identical process, and both would be right about the process, and wrong about the payoff, because the payoff was never the same size for the two of them. Set the two scenarios on the same table and hold them there. The maxed earner reaches full retirement age with a primary insurance amount near $3,900. Delay 3 years, add 24%, and the benefit climbs to roughly $5,100. The gap between claiming at 67 and claiming at 70 is about $1,300 a month. That is the figure in the title, and it is real for this worker. Now the median earner. Same birth year, same discipline, same willingness to wait, their primary insurance amount lands closer to $1,900. Apply the identical 24%, and the benefit rises to about $2,356. The gap between 67 and 70 is roughly $450 a month. Same rule, same patience, same 3 years of foregone checks, a little more than a third of the headline dollars. Here is the central truth the comparison exposes. The rate is a promise made to everyone. The dollars are a promise kept to almost no one at the level the headline implies. 8% is written into federal law and applies uniformly to every worker in the country, from the janitor to the surgeon. But 8% is a multiplier, and a multiplier does not create value. It magnifies whatever value is already there. Hand it a base of $3,900 and it returns $1,300. Hand it a base of $1,900 and it returns $450. The machine is not playing favorites. It is doing arithmetic, and arithmetic rewards the person who arrives with the larger number. The honest answer to the question left standing, does the $1,300 belong to a real person or only to a spreadsheet, is that it belongs to a real person but a rare one. To carry a primary insurance amount near $3,900, a worker has to have earned at or above the Social Security taxable maximum for most of a career. That ceiling was $168,600 in 2024, not brushed once during a good year. Pressed against, year after year, across the 35 earning years the formula counts. The Social Security Administration's own data shows only a small slice of workers pay tax at the maximum in any given year, roughly 6%, and a far smaller slice sustain it across the decades the calculation demands. The $1.300 outcome is not a lie. It is a corner case wearing the costume of a general rule. Consider what that means for the person doing the mental math on their own life. If they earned a solid but ordinary income, teachers, tradespeople, nurses, small business owners who ran lean for tax reasons, their base is closer to the median than to the ceiling. The 8% applies to them fully and faithfully. The dollar reward simply arrives at a different scale. For that person, the decision to delay is not a decision about $1.300. It is a decision about $450, and $450 has to survive a very different cost-benefit test than $1.300 does. This is where the two neighbors from the beginning, quietly separate from most of the audience. The neighbors were maxed earners, 30 years at the same firm, wages riding the union ladder up toward the cap. Their $1.300 gap is genuine and documented, but it is theirs precisely because their earnings history was theirs. The path to the headline number was being paved decades before either of them thought about claiming, in the shape of a lifetime W-2 that most workers never file. The rate is the same for everyone, the base is not, and once the base changes, everything downstream changes with it. For the median earner, the same 3 years of waiting buys something far smaller, and that smaller number does not just shrink the reward. It rewrites the break-even math, the longevity bet, and the question of whether the wait was ever worth surviving at all. Rewind the maxed earner's life to age 25, and the $1.300 is already being decided. Not at the Social Security office, but on a shop floor in the 1980s. The formula that produces a primary insurance amount does not care what a worker earns at 60, it cares about 35 years. The Social Security Administration takes a worker's entire earnings history, selects the highest 35 years, indexes each one for national wage growth, and averages them into a single monthly figure. That average is then run through the benefit formula. 35 years. Not the last few, not the best decade, the whole span, and if a worker has fewer than 35 years of covered earnings, the missing years enter the average as zeros, and a zero is exactly as heavy as it sounds. So follow the timeline forward for the neighbor who ended up with the larger check. At 25, the first full year at the manufacturing firm, earnings sit below the taxable maximum. That year indexes into the record as a middling number. Through the late 20s and into the 30s, the union ladder climbs. By the late 30s, the annual wage crosses the taxable maximum and stays there. $60,600 in 1994, indexed upward, the cap climbing each year, the worker's wage climbing with it, pressed against the ceiling season after season. That is the pattern the formula rewards, not a single spectacular year, a long, unbroken shelf of maximum taxed earnings, 35 deep, with no zeros dragging the average down. Here is the turning point, and it is not a dramatic one. It is the absence of drama. Somewhere in the worker's 50s, the earnings record fills. 35 high years are now on the books. Every additional year of maximum earnings after that does not simply add to the pile. It can only replace a lower indexed early year, and the improvement is marginal. A strong year at 58 might nudge the average by displacing a weaker year from age 26. By the late 50s, those displacements are cosmetic. The average has effectively set. Which means the ceiling on this worker's benefit was reached quietly, without ceremony, years before any claiming decision existed. The primary insurance amount, near $3,900, was not earned at 67 by patients. It was earned across a career by earnings that pressed the cap for 3.5 decades. And then it stopped moving. Now hold that against the consequence, because the consequence is the whole point of walking the tape back this far. The 8% delayed retirement credit, the 24% for waiting to 70, the $1.300 gap, all of it is arithmetic performed on a base that was locked long before the credit could touch it. The credit is a multiplier applied at the very end of the story. The base is written at the beginning and the middle. By the time this worker turns 60, the SSA could, in principle, print the maximum possible check the worker will ever be entitled to at any claiming age. Every future number, the 62 figure, the 67 figure, the 70 figure, is already a fixed percentage of a base that no longer changes in any meaningful way. This is the uncomfortable symmetry of the whole system. The part everyone argues about, when to claim, is the small part. The part almost no one can change by the time they are paying attention. The 35-year earnings shelf is the large part. A worker at 60 can still choose the timing. They cannot rebuild the base. The zeros from a decade out of the workforce, the years of part-time wages, the stretch of self-employment reported, lean for tax reasons. Those are already inside the average, already indexed, already permanent. The base will not move again. Only one variable remains open, and it is the one the title is really about: the timing. What has to already be true at the exact moment a worker turns 62 for the road to 70 to still be walkable? Not desirable. Walkable. Because at 62 the earnings shelf is finished, the base is locked, and for the first time the decision stops being about the past and becomes about the next 8 years. Picture the moment plainly. The maxed earner is 62. The Social Security portal now shows 3 numbers, side by side, each a fixed percentage of the same locked base. Claim now, at 62, and the benefit is roughly $2,730. The primary insurance amount cut by about 30% permanently. Claim at full retirement age, 67, and it is $3,900. Wait to 70, and it is close to $5,100. 3 doors, 1 earnings record. The worker gets to choose exactly one. Run the 3 scenarios against each other, because the choice only makes sense in comparison. Door 1, age 62. Checks begin immediately. 8 years earlier than the top option, the money starts flowing. Call it roughly $32,760 a year, arriving while the worker is still young enough to spend it on something other than medical bills. The cost is the permanent 30% haircut and the forfeiture of every delayed credit that would have stacked on top. Door 2, age 67. The full primary insurance amount, no reduction, no credit. The neutral center of the system, the figure the entire formula is calibrated around. Door 3, age 70. The full $5,100, 24% of delayed credits fused onto the base. Cost of living adjustments compounding on the larger number for the rest of the worker's life. The most durable check the system will ever issue this person. Here is the lesson buried in the comparison, and it is not the one the headline sells. The choice at 62 is not really a choice between $2,730 and $5,100. Nobody experiences those 2 numbers at the same time. The real choice is between 8 years of income starting now and 0 income from Social Security until 70. Door 3 does not hand the worker $5,100 at 62. It hands them nothing at 62, and nothing at 63, and nothing through 69. The reward is real, but it is deferred across 96 months, during which the government sends no check at all. That reframes the entire decision. Waiting is not patience. Waiting is a spending problem. For the road to 70 to stay walkable, one condition has to already be true at 62. The worker must be able to fund 8 years of ordinary life. Housing, food, insurance, the dentist, the roof that fails in year 3, without touching the Social Security benefit they have already earned and could collect today. That money has to come from somewhere: a pension, a portfolio large enough to withdraw from for most of a decade, continued wages from a job the body can still do at 68, a spouse's income covering the gap, something. Absent that something, Door 3 is not a choice. It is a poster on a wall the worker cannot reach. The 8% is still printed there, public and true, but it might as well be behind glass, because the price of admission is not paid at 70. It is paid every month from 62 to 70, in the form of an income the worker has to conjure from resources that are not Social Security. And this is precisely where most people who could reach the larger check turn back, not because they misunderstand the 8%. Because they run out of bridge. The median claimant files early, not out of ignorance but out of arithmetic. The checks they could delay are the checks they need to eat. The fork at 62 looks like a decision about Social Security. It is actually a decision about everything else a person owns. So the question is no longer whether the $1,300 is worth waiting for. It is a colder question. Where exactly does 8 years of a life get funded from, if not from the benefit itself? Watch what actually happens in the household of a 66-year-old who is doing everything right. The last paycheck cleared months ago. Social Security has not started, because the plan is to wait. And every month, money still leaves the account. The mortgage, the Medicare Part B premium, the supplemental policy, the property tax, the granddaughter's birthday, the water heater that dies on a Tuesday. The bills do not know the worker is being patient. They arrive on schedule, indifferent to the 8% accruing invisibly somewhere in a federal database. That is the ordinary, unphotographed scene at the center of this whole story. Nobody posts it. There is no milestone in it. But it is where the $1,300 is actually won or lost. Here is the insight it forces. The delayed retirement credit is not the mechanism that produces the larger check. The bridge is. The 8% is just the reward printed on the far side of a gap that has to be crossed with someone else's money. Money that is not Social Security. Between 62 and 70, in the fullest case, a worker has to replace up to 8 years of income out of resources they built before retirement. The credit does not fund that crossing. Nothing about the credit helps a single day of it. The credit only pays out after the crossing is complete. So the real question is not how large the reward is, it is what the bridge is made of. Trace the mechanism, because there are only a handful of materials it can be built from, and each one has a cost the headline never mentions. The first is a pension, a monthly income that arrives regardless of the claiming decision, so the worker can leave Social Security untouched. Fewer than 1 in 7 private sector workers has a traditional pension today, so for most, this beam does not exist. The second is continued work, wages from a job the body and the labor market both still permit at 68. Real, but fragile, and often not a choice the worker controls. The third is a spouse's income covering the household while one benefit is held back. And the fourth, the one most people are quietly forced to use, is a portfolio drawn down deliberately, on purpose, years earlier than the conventional advice permits. Sit with that fourth beam, because it is the one that turns the whole story uncomfortable. The standard instruction a saver absorbs across a working life is to protect the nest egg. Delay withdrawals, let it compound, touch it last. The bridge to 70 demands the opposite. To reach the larger check, the maxed earner has to spend down the very assets they were told to guard, pulling perhaps $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year out of a portfolio for 8 straight years, while collecting nothing from the system they paid into for 4 decades. From the outside it looks like recklessness. From the inside it is the price of admission to the 8%. And the arithmetic is exact. A worker delaying from 62 to 70 forfeits roughly $2,730 a month for 96 months. Call it $250,000 in checks never cashed, and must find that $250,000 somewhere else to live on in the meantime. The bridge is not a metaphor. It is a specific 6-figure sum that has to already exist, in a form the worker can spend at the exact moment they choose to wait, which quietly divides every viewer into 2 groups, not the patient and the impatient, the ones who have a bridge and the ones who do not. The 8% is offered to both. Only one group can afford to walk toward it. So the celebrated retiree who ended up $1,300 ahead did not win by waiting. They won by having something to burn while they waited. And what they burned was exactly the kind of asset most savers are warned never to spend down. Waiting to 70 assumes a body that keeps working, a job that keeps existing, and a life that stays where the plan left it. For a large share of workers, none of those 3 holds. And the delay ends not as a rejected option, but as an option that was never offered. Here the honest objection has to be stated at full strength, because it is the one most likely to be true of the person listening. The obvious rebuttal to everything so far is that the bridge is a discipline problem. Build the portfolio, keep the pension, marry the second income, and the road to 70 opens. Frame it that way, and the median claimant's early filing looks like a failure of preparation. A person who should have saved more, planned harder, held on. The 8% in that telling is available to anyone willing to arrange their life around it. Take that argument seriously, because it is not empty. Some people do file at 62 out of impatience, or out of a break-even bet they have run and lost on purpose. The bridge can, in fact, be built by someone with a pension, a paid-off house, and a spouse still earning. For that person, the delay genuinely is a choice. and choosing to claim early is a defensible one. The steelman holds for a real slice of workers who had every beam of the bridge and simply decided the wait was not worth it. But the argument collapses the moment it meets the people the labor market removes on its own schedule. Consider the worker laid off at 61, a plant closing, a role eliminated, an industry contracting. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has long documented that older displaced workers take far longer to find new work and, when they do, often return at lower pay. The bridge that required continued wages just lost its central beam, and no amount of prior discipline rebuilds a job that no longer exists. Claiming at 62 is not impatience here, it is the only income left standing. Consider the worker whose health fails at 63. Roughly 1 in 4 Americans develops a disability that limits work before traditional retirement age, and the timing does not consult the claiming plan. A body that cannot work cannot fund a bridge with wages, and a portfolio meant to last 30 years cannot absorb 8 years of early heavy withdrawal plus a medical event. Filing early becomes triage. And consider the one that almost never appears in the arithmetic, the caregiver. A parent, a spouse, a disabled adult child needs care, and the worker leaves the labor force to provide it. AARP has estimated the population of unpaid family caregivers in the tens of millions, disproportionately women, in exactly the late 50s to 60s window, where the earnings shelf is supposed to be finishing strong. Every month spent caregiving is a month of no wages, a month closer to needing the benefit now, and often a month of zeros dropped into the very earnings average that sets the base. So the rebuttal to the discipline argument is not that discipline is worthless. It is that discipline governs only the part of the story the worker controls, and the events that close the path most decisively are the ones no worker controls at all. Layoff, illness, and caregiving do not ask whether the bridge was well built. They remove the person from the bridge. This is the quiet correction to the entire optimistic frame. The delay is not merely a decision that requires resources. It is a decision that requires the continued cooperation of circumstances a person cannot command, an employer, a spine, a family that does not need rescuing. The 8% rewards the worker whose life stayed on the rails long enough to reach the far side. Waiting until 70 is a decision that assumes you get to decide. The 8% that funds the entire $1,300 is younger than the retirees collecting it. For most of Social Security's history, waiting past full retirement age was a bad deal, a mathematical mistake the system quietly punished. The advice to delay, treated today as timeless prudence, is a recent invention, and the arithmetic it rests on was deliberately rewritten within the lifetime of people now claiming. Walk it back to the beginning. When the delayed retirement credit first appeared in the 1972 amendments, it was set at 1% per year. 1. A worker who held off past 65 earned a single percentage point for each year of foregone checks, a reward so thin it did not come close to compensating for the income given up. Under that rule, delaying was close to irrational for almost everyone. The system was, in effect, telling workers to claim on time and not think twice. The number climbed in stages, not overnight. The 1983 amendments, the same landmark law that raised full retirement age and taxed benefits for higher earners, scheduled the credit to rise gradually across the following decades. It moved up a fraction at a time, tied to the worker's year of birth, 3%, then higher, a slow mechanical escalator written into statute. The full 8% per year, the figure quoted today as though it were carved into the program's foundation, only reached its final level for workers born in 1943 or later, which means the generous version of this rule became fully operative for its first eligible cohort in the years around 2013. Sit with that date, the delayed retirement credit that this entire investigation has taken apart. The engine of the $1,300, the reward at the far end of the bridge, has been paying out at its headline rate for roughly a decade. A person retiring today at 70 is among the earliest cohorts for whom waiting was ever unambiguously worth it. Their own parents, claiming under the older schedule, would have been throwing money away by doing the same thing. This is why the historical parallel matters more than a footnote. The advice inverted. Under the 1% rule, the correct move for a rational worker was to claim early or on time and never look back. And an entire generation of retirees and the advisors who counseled them internalized exactly that instinct. Delaying was for the confused. Take the money. The culture around Social Security was built on a version of the math that no longer exists. Then the number quietly reached 8%, and the correct answer flipped for the workers who could afford the bridge, while the inherited instinct to claim early stayed frozen in place. The rule changed, the reflex did not. There is a sober lesson in the timing, and it has nothing to do with patience. A statutory number set by Congress can be moved by Congress. 8% is not a law of nature or a promise of the market. It is a policy choice that was 1% within living memory and could, in principle, be adjusted again. The retiree collecting the larger check is not being rewarded for wisdom that transcends the ages. They are standing in a narrow window, old enough to face the modern rule, young enough that the rule turned generous before they had to decide. The delay looks ancient. It looks like the sort of thing a grandfather would have said. But the math that makes it pay is barely older than a smartphone. The advice to wait is younger than most of the people receiving it. 96 months of forfeited checks. That is the number the 8% has to overcome before the larger check means anything at all. And it is the number the headline never subtracts. Lay it out cleanly, because break-even is not a feeling, it is division. The maxed earner who delays from 62 to 70 walks away with roughly $5, $100 a month instead of the $2, $730 available at 62, an advantage of about $2, $370 every month for life. That is the prize. But the prize was bought with 8 years of checks never cashed. At $2, $730 a month for 96 months, the worker forfeited roughly $262,000 in benefits they could have collected and did not. So the question is mechanical. How long does the $2, $370 monthly advantage take to repay a $262,000 head start? Divide. $262,000 divided by $2, $370 is about 111 months, a little over 9 years. The larger check does not pull ahead the day it starts arriving at 70. It spends the first 9 years merely climbing back to even. The worker does not cross into genuine profit until roughly age 79. Every month lived before 79 is a month in which the patient choice is still behind the impatient one on a pure cash count. That is what the 8% hides. It advertises a bigger check and stays silent about the crater the bigger check has to climb out of first. Now recalculate. Because a single break-even age is a lie of precision, the number moves the moment any assumption moves. Add cost of living adjustments and the break-even pulls slightly earlier because the same percentage raise applied to $5, $100 delivers more dollars than applied to $2, $730, and that gap widens each year. Introduce the opportunity cost of the money, the idea that early checks could have been invested rather than spent, and the break-even slides later, sometimes into the mid-80s, because the forfeited $250,000 was not idle in the comparison, it could have been working. Change nothing about the rule, and the honest range still runs from roughly 79 to the mid-80s, depending on which assumption a person is willing to defend. And run it once more for the median earner, because their arithmetic is not the same story at smaller scale, it is a different story. Their monthly advantage from delaying is closer to $450, not $2, $370. Their forfeited sum from waiting is smaller too, but the division still lands in the same neighborhood. A head start of roughly $130,000 in foregone checks against a $450 monthly gain repays in about 240 months. 20 years. A median earner who delays does not break even until the early 80s either, and buys a $450 monthly reward to get there, not $1, $300. So the reckoning is the same shape for both workers, and it is not the shape the title implies. Delaying is not a windfall, it is a longevity bet, placed with real money, against an actuarial table. Here is the wager stated plainly. The worker who waits is betting they will live well past the break-even age. The Social Security Administration's own life tables put average remaining life expectancy at 65, somewhere in the low to mid-80s, which means the median claimant is being asked to wager on beating the very average the government computes. Live to 90, and the delay was a decision of quiet brilliance. The extra years of the larger check compound into 6 figures of advantage. Die at 76, and the patience was a loss. $250,000 in checks surrendered for a reward the worker did not live long enough to collect. The break-even does not care about wisdom, it cares about a date on a death certificate no one gets to see in advance. The $1,300 is not free money sitting on a table, it is the winning side of a bet that only pays if the bettor outlives the odds. The retiree needs to reach the early 80s just to break even on the deal, and everything past that line is the only place the celebrated number ever actually lives. The break-even math treats the human lifespan as a single number, average remaining life expectancy at 65, somewhere in the low to mid-80s. But an average is a resting point between extremes, and no individual retiree lives an average. They live one specific length, drawn from a distribution far wider than the tidy midpoint suggests. The entire delay decision rests on a figure that describes a crowd and tells the individual almost nothing. That dispersion is the part the break-even calculation quietly assumes away, and it is the part that decides whether the weight was genius or waste. The Social Security Administration's own actuarial life tables make the spread explicit. A 65-year-old man has average remaining life expectancy of roughly 18 years, reaching about 83. A 65-year-old woman, closer to 20, reaching about 85. Those are the numbers that anchor most retirement advice. But the same tables show the range around them is enormous. A meaningful share of 65-year-olds do not reach 75 at all. Another meaningful share sail past 90. The midpoint is real, but almost nobody lands on it. They scatter to either side, and the side they land on is unknowable at the moment the claiming decision has to be made. Layer in what researchers have documented about who lands where, and the dispersion stops looking random. A body of work, including studies published in JAMA and by the Brookings Institution, has found that the gap in life expectancy between the highest and lowest earners has widened to more than a decade. The people with the income, the pensions, the portfolios, the exact people who can afford the bridge to 70, are on average the people who live longest. The people forced to claim early, by layoff, illness, or a thin earnings record, tend to have shorter lifespans. The delay pays off most reliably for the group already positioned to make it, and least reliably for the group the system pushes toward claiming at 62. Follow that through to the individual, because the aggregate hides the cruelty of the specific case. Take the maxed earner from this investigation, the one whose break-even sits near age 79. Suppose the plan works flawlessly. The bridge is funded, the checks are held, the larger benefit begins at 70, then a diagnosis arrives at 74. The worker dies at 76, well within the ordinary spread the life tables describe, entirely unremarkable in a distribution that wide. They collected the $5.100 check for 6 years and never crossed break-even. On a pure cash count, they surrendered roughly $262,000 in early checks to buy a reward they did not live long enough to keep. The delay was in hindsight a loss, not because they chose foolishly but because they bet on the side of the distribution they did not land on. Now the same worker, same plan, living to 91, the larger check compounds through 11 years past break-even, and the advantage stacks into 6 figures. Identical decision. Opposite verdict. The only variable that moved was a date no one was allowed to know. This is what makes the delay a genuine wager rather than a strategy. A strategy can be evaluated in advance on its merits. A wager can only be settled after the fact, by an outcome outside the bettor's control. Waiting to 70 is the second kind. The retiree is placing real money, $250,000 in foregone checks, on the proposition that their own body will outperform the actuarial midpoint. And the midpoint is not a target they can aim at. It is a coin they cannot see land. For a single person, that is the whole calculus. Run the odds against your own health, your family history, your honest read of the years you have left, and place the bet knowing you will never learn in time whether you were right. But almost no one making this decision is single at the moment they make it, and once a spouse enters the frame, the bet stops being about the claimer's lifespan at all. A widow at 82 opens her bank statement and finds the household's Social Security income has not fallen to half. It has fallen to the larger of the two checks, and in this household, the larger check was the one her husband spent 8 years and $250,000 in foregone benefits to build. That is the mechanism almost no one runs the delay math through, and it is the one that changes who the wait was ever really for. Hold the tension where the last block left it. As a bet on a single lifespan, delaying to 70 is a coin the bettor cannot see land. The maxed earner who dies at 76 loses on a pure cash count, $250,000 surrendered for a reward collected too briefly. Run that scenario in isolation, and the delay looks like a mistake made by a disciplined man who simply drew the wrong side of the actuarial table. Now widen the frame by one person, and the verdict inverts. Here is the relief the individual calculation missed. Social Security survivor rules do not treat a delayed check as wasted when the higher earner dies. When one spouse dies, the survivor keeps the larger of the two benefits and the smaller one stops. If the higher earner delayed to 70 and built a $5.100 check, the survivor steps up to that amount for the rest of their own life. Not the reduced figure, not half, but the full delayed benefit, including every delayed retirement credit and every cost of living adjustment compounded on top. The delay did not buy the claimer a longer payout, it bought the household a floor that outlives the claimer entirely. Recompute the man who died at 76. As a solo bet he lost, but his widow, 74 at his death and healthy, now collects $5.100 a month instead of the $3.900 he would have locked in by claiming at full retirement age. That is roughly $1.300 a month, flowing to a person who never made the decision for as long as she lives. If she reaches 90, the delay her husband appeared to lose on quietly pays out well into six figures to her. This is the revelation the break-even arithmetic structurally cannot see. The standard break-even runs on one life, the survivor provision runs on two. For a married couple, the relevant lifespan is not the claimer's, it is the longer of the two, the second death, the last check standing. And because wives, on average, outlive husbands by several years, and because the higher earner is disproportionately the husband, the delay decision is frequently a decision about a woman's income in her 80s, made by a man who will not be there to see whether it worked. Which reframes who the delay serves. The higher earner delaying to 70 is, in effect, buying life insurance priced in foregone Social Security checks, a hedge that pays the survivor precisely when a single retiree's break-even math would have called the wait a failure. The worse the claimer's own longevity, the more the survivor provision rescues the decision. The two bets point in opposite directions and partially cancel. Die early, and the couple's survivor still wins. Live long, and the claimer wins directly. It is the rare case where both branches of the coin land in the household's favor. But notice the cost this reveals. The single person delaying to 70 has no survivor to catch the value if they die at 76. Their loss is simply a loss. The provision that redeems the married higher earner does not exist for them. So the same 8%, the same $250,000 bridge, the same $1.300 is a far stronger bet inside a marriage than outside one. And strongest of all for the higher earner in a couple with a long-lived younger spouse. Does the delayed check win the bet? And against whom? It wins, but often not for the person who waited. It wins for whoever is still cashing it after they are gone. The $1.300 may outlive the person who waited for it. The 8% is public. The bridge is private. That single asymmetry explains everything this investigation has walked backward through, and it is the reason the larger check keeps sitting unclaimed while everyone can see it. The rule announces itself to the whole country at once. Wait past full retirement age, collect 8% a year, arrive at 70 with a check as much as $1.300 larger. No application. No gatekeeper. Printed on a government website anyone can read. That is the loud half of the story, and it is the half the headline sells. The quiet half is everything the rule does not mention. It does not mention the 35-year earnings shelf that locks the base decades before the credit can touch it. It does not mention the $250,000 in foregone checks a maxed earner must fund from somewhere between 62 and 70. It does not mention the layoff at 61, the diagnosis at 63, the parent who needs care at 64. It does not mention that break-even does not arrive until the early 80s, or that the delay is a bet on a coin no one gets to see land. So answer the question this whole video was built to answer. If the extra $1.300 is just sitting there for the taking, why do most people who could claim it never actually reach it? Because it is not sitting there for the taking, it only looks that way from a distance. Here is the central truth the autopsy exposes. The 8% is offered to everyone, but the path to it is closed years earlier by choices and events that never looked like Social Security decisions at all. The worker who ended up $1.300 ahead did not win by understanding the rule. They won by having a lifetime of maximum earnings, a bridge large enough to live on for 8 unpaid years, a body and a job that held together into their late 60s, and enough longevity, or a survivor, to make the bet pay. Strip away any one of those, and the 8% stays behind glass. Which is why the median claimant filing at 62 is almost never making a mistake. They are reading their own resources honestly. The checks they could delay are the checks they need to eat. Their reward for waiting would have been $450, not $1, $300, against a break-even in their 80s they may not reach. For them, claiming early is not a failure of discipline. It is arithmetic performed correctly on a smaller base. So look at your own case with the tape fully rewound. Ask what your 35-year earnings record actually holds, because the base is already written. Ask whether a real bridge exists, a pension, a portfolio you can spend down, a working spouse, because without it the delay is a poster, not a plan. Ask soberly how long your family tends to live, and whether a spouse would inherit the larger check if you went first. The answers are not the same for any two people, and the honest ones are rarely the flattering ones. The $1.300 is real. It belongs to a real person. But that person had a specific earnings history, a specific bridge, and a specific longevity, and most of what decided their outcome was fixed long before they ever chose a claiming age. The money sits unclaimed, not because people fail to see it, but because seeing it was never the hard part. Run your own numbers before you trust anyone's headline. This is education, not personalized advice.